Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm Selena. I'm a school data coach and consultant, and I'm going to be talking to you this afternoon about the challenge around measuring progress as well as, or instead of only measuring achievement. And for part of the session this afternoon, I'm joined by Beverly Dann, who's a lecturer at the University of the Sunshine Coast. I'd just like to firstly start with an acknowledgement of country. I'm currently on Yagara country, which is the home of the Turrbal people, and I'd like to offer my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I recognise that learning in so many different forms has happened on this land that I find myself on for countless generations. And I know that the people we've got with us today are in all different parts of the country and all different lands. And I know the same thing, I know you extend your respect as well. I guess the plan for today is, I'm just going to go to my PowerPoint. The way this works this afternoon is I'm going to talk you through, I guess, some of the policy and the context, and Beverly's going to talk a little bit about the historical context of how we find ourselves in this place where progress is being talked about as well as achievement. And then I'm going to go through a few different examples and things that I've seen in different schools and different strategies that I've seen people kind of manually do that. I guess for you this afternoon, if this is relatively new for you, then I hope that this gives you some, different ways of thinking and doing and maybe some new strategies that you might want to try in the future. If this is something that you've got a little bit of practice in, hopefully this will expand your toolkit a little bit. For some of the people who watch this might be something that you are quite comfortable with and something that you work with quite often. And I hope that if that's you, that this session is affirming and helps you put some of the language around the why and how we can do this so that you can build capacity in others on their journey. I just wanted to start this afternoon by showing you a short, it's a segment of a TED talk. It's actually a couple of different segments that I've cut and stitched together. But I've been working in this progress and achievement space quite a bit within the last year. And this TED talk is by Dean Furness, and it came out in February this year, I believe. And as soon as I saw it and watched it, I thought, this is exactly what I mean when I talk about progress and achievement. And I'm more than happy to share the link for the full TED talk afterwards, but I've cut it down to kind of only a couple of minutes. So I'll just watch that one now.
It seems we've been measured almost all of our lives. When we were infants with our height and our weight, and as we grew, it became our speed and our strength. And even in school with our test scores, and today with our salaries and job performance. It seems as if those personal averages are almost always used to measure where we are in comparison to our peers. And I think we should look at that a little differently. That personal average is just that. It's something very personal. It's for you. And I think if you focus on that and work to build that, you can really start to accomplish some really amazing things. This idea started for me on a December evening in 2011. I just stepped outside to do our evening chores to feed our horses. I hopped into our tractor, and a few minutes later, a 5-foot-tall, 700-pound bale of hay fell from the loader, crushing me in the seat of the tractor, and in the process, shattering my T5 and T6 vertebrae. I didn't lose consciousness, but I felt this buzz throughout my body, and I knew it had happened right away. My hands were reaching for my legs, but my legs didn't recognize anything touching them. And in fact, I couldn't feel anything from the center of my chest down. So there I was, about 100 feet from the house, with my arms wrapped around the steering wheel, trying to hold myself up, waiting for help. And unlike what you see on TV and the movies, as much as I tried to get the dogs to go to the house and get help, they just stared at me. Well, 45 minutes later, my wife came home, and I heard her step out of the house and like normal, if I needed help. Hey, do you need help? And I said, yes. And there was a brief pause, and then I heard her yell, do you need 911 help? And again, I yelled, yes. Well, not long after, I was enjoying my very first helicopter ride all the way to the hospital. Now, the injury wasn't very dramatic or graphic. I simply broke a bone or two. And in the process, I was told I'd probably never walk again. It became very normal for me to use a rope to sit up in bed because my abdominal muscles no longer work. or to use a board to slide out of bed into a wheelchair, or to even wait for people to reach things for me. Everything that I had learned and had known about my height and my strength and my balance and my mobility was blown away. My entire personal average had been reset. Now, you can be sure in those days, I was being measured more than ever by the doctors and nurses for sure, but maybe more so in my own mind. And I found myself comparing what I thought I was going to be able to do going forward with what I once was able to do. And I became pretty frustrated. It took some very consistent prodding from my wife, kept saying, get your eyes up before I could get moving forward. And I soon realized that I almost had to forget about the person I was before and the things I was able to do before. I almost had to pretend it was never me. And I'm afraid if I had not made that realization, my frustration would have turned into something much harder to recover from. Now, luckily, a few weeks later, I was transferred to a specialty spinal cord rehab hospital about 10 hours from home. And wouldn't you know, the first day of rehab and the first session, we had something called fit class. And a group of us broke into teams to see which team could do the most reps in the weight machine. Now, we've all been there, haven't been to the gym in a year or two, and neither had I. And so what do? You try to do what you did a couple of years ago. You do a couple of sets. And then what do? A couple more. And you're feeling even better, so you do more. And the next 2 weeks, you complain to your family about how sore you are. Well, my team went all out, and we won. We won big. And for the next 3 days, I could not straighten my arms, which isn't that big a deal, except when you're in a wheelchair. And that's really what you have to use to get around. And that proved to be a very important lesson for me. You know, it was one thing that I couldn't compare myself to myself, but even around people in the same situation in that hospital, I found that I couldn't try to keep pace or set pace with them as well. And I was left with really only one choice, and that was to focus on who I was at that point in time, with where I needed to go and to get back to who I needed to be. For the next 6 weeks, for 7 to 8 hours a day, that's what I did. I built little by little. And as you might expect, when you're recovering from a spinal cord injury, you're going to have a bad day. You might have a few in a row. And what I found out is that good and bad really didn't have a lot of meaning unless I had the context of knowing what my average was.
So the reason there we go. So the reason I really like that clip is I love the way that he is so humble in the way that he speaks. I like, there's a line there where he says, I just broke a bone. But the impact and the devastation for him in his life of that single bone or two was obviously really profound. But the thing I think that I really like about this talk is that he talks about not only could he not compare himself to his previous context, because he obviously is now a paraplegic compared to being able-bodied beforehand, but he said he can't even really compare himself to people around him in similar contexts, other people who are in wheelchairs, because they're all at different places in their journey, just like he is. And the reason why I think that story and that TED Talk really resonates with me around this discussion of progress and achievement is because progress is so important. And it is that why should we always be comparing students to other students when actually we could measure their progress compared to how they've gone in the past or where they were at in the past? So I guess what we've done traditionally in schools, and we've done pretty well, is we've measured achievement. So we've used formative assessment and summative assessment, and we've given students grades, marks, percentages, whatever it might be. We've written report comments, often based on the level of achievement or success that a student has had in a program of study that they've been involved in. And that's really great. And we celebrate that at the end of the year. We have awards nights where, subject award winners receive prizes, DUXers, the top academic award winners for each year level. That's a celebration of achievement. But it's a really clear distinction, or it's a really clear change if we start thinking about celebrating or recognizing what progress is. So progress is actually all of those little steps along the way. And when we make progress, we're taking little steps towards trying to achieve an end goal. And like in the TED Talk where Dean talks about not using other people to compare against because they're in a different context to us, that's actually what progress this conversation is as well. It's comparing a student to whatever their starting point was. It might be comparing them to where they were 2 weeks ago. It might be a month ago. It might be last term. but it's a comparison of their own skills and understanding and performance compared to where they were. We may use, or it could actually, it is possible that a progress measure might actually use achievement information. So take, for example, if a student finishes a semester in year 4 and they get a result overall for English, and it's a summative assessment result, that's an achievement measure, and that a student might have might be recognised for their achievement based on that result. But if we start to build a picture of that student's achievement over time longitudinally, then that becomes a discussion and a shift in our practice, because the focus is then on the progress that they're making, not just the achievement of one kind of point in time or one academic session that they've been involved in. Celebration of progress can also happen and should also happen in schools. So I'll talk a little bit later, but there's some really great examples that where I've worked with schools where I've seen them actually have recognition assemblies where they've just celebrated the kids that have made the most progress in their school. So I think it's really powerful. And what those awards have done is they've completely shifted the conversation between the teachers and the students about what's important, and ultimately, hopefully, that success and the achievement happens. But when we can start to talk about progress, it's more of a process conversation about our learning.
I've got my headphones on. Thank you.
So at this point, I might just pass over to Beverly. So as I said at the beginning, Beverly's a lecturer at the University of Sunshine Coast. She is an absolute superstar. She loves data probably as much as I do, which is really saying something. And she has been working in the area of using and analysing and interpreting data and using progress and achievement since way before I realised how cool it actually was. So I'm going to pass over to Beverly, and she's going to give a little bit of backstory about, I guess how we find ourselves where we are now. Over to you, Beverly.
Thank you, Selena. I wouldn't probably have ever described myself as being a very, data nerd, but anyway, thank you for allowing me to join in with this seminar. Just to give you a little bit of my background and have a better understanding of sort of where I'm coming from. I've taught in the United States and in Australia, probably about equal amount of time. I've spent half my life there and half my life here. So sitting in both camps really, and have a view of education from both sides. I started teaching in the 1980s, and at that time, it was very much what we're all very familiar with, is that achievement focus. What's the summative result? And how have the students achieved against those summative viewpoints that we have in school? And while in the 80s, now believe it or not, that's quite a long time ago, but back in the 1980s, we started to have this, I think, a first look at thinking about tracking students' progress. And we did this, it was mandated at the state level. So it wasn't a school level thing, it was a state level. And this was in the United States at the time. But we were given posters. So you have your curriculum and you might have a reading poster. It has all of your year level content descriptors or elaborations across the top. And then going down the side is where you would put the students' names. And guess what? There were like 50 squares that needed to be filled in with achievement by the end of the year. Now, lower grades tended to put stickers in the little squares as students demonstrated that they met them. And the middle to upper primary needed to put in some scores so we could actually look to see how much they're achieving. So this is before computers, before we had the luxury of computers to store this data and collect the data for us. We're doing this all by hand. So imagine where we have our lovely bulletin boards with all these wonderful pictures and concepts and things on them. We had a wall full of posters for every subject area where we were trying to track how well students were going in every subject. Now, with that, I mean, clearly, I'm sure you can imagine, it's really easy to identify students who were, getting everything really well and those that weren't. But really, I think what it began to get us to think about was those students stuck in the middle. Because in those days, we oftentimes sort of taught to the middle of the class, and you would have your students at the top that always flew through. You always had some at the bottom that just never made it. And there wasn't really much done for them. They just got lost. So it was the first time, I think, that we began to identify more specifically where students were performing well, where their gaps were, and those sorts of things. It also led to some competition. So I must say that while those charts were a first look at how to track or how to consider students' growth over a period of time, I must say we really didn't do anything about it. It was there on the wall. We could use it to show parents. We could use it to talk about as staff, but we didn't. You know, it was there. The possibilities that I think of now that we could have done with those things were endless, but it was brand new and we had no idea what to do with it. We were just doing what we were told. And believe it or not, people from the state would come in and visit your schools to see if you had them up on the wall. So that was required. At that time, it was a requirement. And you know what that does for students who don't do so well, you know, seeing their name up there with no stickers or really low scores, it's demeaning. And so while it was a positive step in a direction for tracking, it had a lot of negative outcomes, I believe. Now, in the 2000s, we were looking at standardized tests. Again, paper trail kinds of things. I can remember my tables at home, dining room table being absolutely covered, because we sort of divided up at that point what year level you would take. And so I don't remember what I had now, but I had whatever year level all over the table, all of their answers, the results, and I had to code where our strengths and weaknesses were, why I felt like we were having issues in certain areas. And that became a focus then for staff meetings. It became a focus for professional development. So it's a decade later, at least, before we've made this huge step towards using this data to inform our teaching. We weren't using it for that very well in the beginning. It's taken a couple of decades. It's taken a long time, and we're still trying to get this right. We're still trying to figure out how do we target their needs and how do we target our own needs when we have this data sitting in front of us. Yeah, I guess I could keep going, but I don't want to take up the time for all of this. It just really shows that we've made improvement, but we've really not made a lot of improvement. We're still trying to answer the same questions, and we're still trying to figure out how to become better teachers and help the students to become better learners.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Beverly. I think it's a common thread with data people. You just can't stop us talking about data. We just enjoy it too much. But you alluded to a really important point there, and it's probably one I should have made earlier as well. But why we do this, it's all about the actions that we can take and the shifts in programs and pedagogy that we can make in the classroom, or the conversation that we have the next day, or the slightly different activity the following lesson that we might be able to plan that helps a student maybe who hasn't made much progress to boost them up a little bit. It might be for a student who has made extraordinary progress and we want to maybe extend them. It's all for me, always about the whole reason that we're collecting data is not so that it sits on laptops and we make pretty visualizations online now. It's actually about, well, what does that mean for our young people? What does it mean for them? And how does it improve the academic care that they receive in a classroom, and then ideally the outcomes that they experience down the track. So thank you, Beverly. I might just pause at that point and just ask for you to jump onto the chat box and just, I'm going to give you about 2 or 3 minutes to have a think about what are your thoughts on this? Does it have a place in your school at the moment? How important is it for you, for your students? Are there conversations that you often have? So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do that in the chat box. Claire, that's a great point that you make there. Claire says, have great success with celebrating students who may otherwise have been unrecognised or maybe not normally recognised. And that's, I think, a really important thing to point out. It's not every student will always be able to achieve at the highest level and be recognised on assemblies and be recognised with awards, but I think every student can make progress and can make different rates of progress at different times. So I think that's a really important point, Claire. I really like that. And Beck and Bernadette both kind of mentioning there or referring to formative assessment as well. And I haven't, in the examples I'm going to share this afternoon, there's not a lot of formative assessment in there, but it's a really important way of tracking that progress along or through time. So for example, if students set target grades or they've got goals for a particular subject and you have some historical data from previous, like their previous engagement in that subject area, by looking at formative assessment and collecting and collating that along the way, you can have progress conversations with students about how they're going towards achieving their goal or whatever their target is for that subject or learning area. So super important to include formative assessment in there. Yeah, Alison, about assemblies, I'll talk about that in a minute, but it's pretty awesome. We've had, for the people who've read my first book, there's a story in there about a boy who we recognised on assembly for his progress. He made a significant amount of progress in reading comprehension, and he'd never received an academic award on assembly before, and he was in year 8. And it was just the most beautiful experience ever. He actually wasn't going to get up on assembly. He was so scared, and he did. He got up, received his award, and everybody else was lining up in the front of the assembly hall. And he had made a bit of an agreement with the learning support teacher that he would stand up, collect it, shake hands, and then sit back down, but that was the only way we could get him up. But we were like, that's awesome. He's actually gotten up and received something. So it's kids like him that tracking and celebrating progress is really, really powerful for. Yeah, Brody, formative assessment as well. Yeah, awesome. And then involving students in the process, which is what Brody has mentioned too as well. It's the language that our shift in language can be really, really powerful around this. And it draws in then, when we talk about progress, we can start really easily talking about learner dispositions and things like persistence and trying hard and grit and that sort of thing, which can be incredibly powerful, not only for your subject, but in other learning areas as well. Thank you for your contributions there. I'm just going to go back to the PowerPoint. So I guess how have we found out, or why are we here? Now, there's a number of different policy and framing documents in Australia that impact our work, and I often revert to these or talk about these because they do shape our role, no matter how often or how little or how frequently you engage with these documents. They do have an impact at system level, and that filters down to schools and into classrooms. So the National School Improvement Tool, for example, one of the domains that the National School Improvement Tool assesses schools on is domain 2 is the use and analysis of data. And in their description, the description is the one on the left there, that is right at on the top of the first page when they talk about the data domain. And you'll notice there that it says from standardized, in the case of data from standardized tests, measures of growth across the years of school. So there's an expectation in the National School Improvement Tool that schools and teachers are talking about progress in the same ways and as much as they're talking about achievement. The descriptor on the right-hand side there, I'm not sure what you can and can't see because I had people in the way, people spaced in the way. That description on the right is in the National School Improvement Tool PDF document. You can see a description, which is just a broad overall category description of like the different levels that the school will be in. So it's like outstanding, high and low, or medium and low. And each school is placed in one of those for each domain. Now, you'll notice there, for a school to be deemed to be outstanding in the use of data, they need to monitor growth across the years of school. They need to include things like value added and growth measures in what they do. And they also need to have individual and class performance and progress information. So that's one of those really key kind of documents that has come out, and frameworks that influence our work. That came out in 2014, and which was not long after the 2008 Melbourne Declaration, where probably for the first time at a national level, this conversation kind of started to happen. And in 2011, the first versions of the Australian curriculum came out as well. And the professional standards for teachers. There's kind of been a lot of things in the mix that have happened that have impacted policy and these framing documents. More recently, so the Melbourne Declaration was replaced in December last year by the Alice Springs Declaration. And you'll notice the thing that I love, being the data nerd that I am, is that the use of data and evidence is actually mentioned twice as much in the Alice Springs Declaration, or twice as often in the Alice Springs Declaration to what it was in the Melbourne Declaration, which is really good for people like me who live for this stuff. But you'll notice there that, again, it's measuring and insisting on progress tracking. So being able to identify learner progress and growth, looking at the progress of individuals. And yeah, as it kind of said in the last document in the National School Improvement Tool, we can look at the progress of individual students, but we can also look at the progress that small groups within our classes are making, or a class as a whole, and compare the growth and the progress in different classes. Or we could look at a whole cohort and see, you know, what are the things that are working for them, where have they made the most growth, and where have they not made as much growth. And no matter what level we're looking at this, it's always about informing the practice and the decisions and the resourcing that happen after that analysis is done. I know some of you joining us today are either senior leaders or working towards or aspiring to be a senior leader in a school context. And you'll see that in the Australian Professional Standards for Principals, it says there, excuse my dodgy highlighting, but principals systematically monitor and report on student progress. So again, it's everywhere. We kind of can't really get away from it, unfortunately. So I might just jump back to the chat box and again give you a couple of moments to do that. So do you have any ideas of, pardon me, that's my dog. Do you have any ideas, or have you seen this work for you or for other teachers anywhere? When we talk about actually reporting on, celebrating, discussing progress, even if it's just one specific example of how you do that or could do that, could you share that in the chat box now? I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. So I only just noticed Brooke's comment from before about celebrating progress in PAT, for example. She's right, rather than just assuming that somebody bombed out on the test, actually looking at maybe how far they've come from the last time they sat it. It's a really good point. Yeah, agreed, Terry. Unfortunately, a lot of teachers don't have time to analyse results longitudinally. And yeah, you're spot on. The examples that I'm going to talk through in a minute are all things that teachers or middle leaders or whatever role you're in your school, practical things that you could do, but it requires kind of that manual handling element of this. There are certainly some dashboards around the visualization dashboards for schools that some schools use that do this better than others, and some of them start to show that growth longitudinally. Yeah, and there's pros and cons to those. Some of the ones that I've seen show the summative assessment results, for example. So every semester they show a line graph, and some even compare the students' performance over time compared with the cohort's performance over time as like an average, which can be really good. The downside is for visualization platforms like that is that it's not customizable, and you would have to export that information to start to build kind of a formative assessment profile on it as well. So yeah, absolutely agree. The tools that we have are, yeah, they're limited at this stage, and it does require time, and that's one of the biggest challenges I see and I hear from schools. It's just the time to actually analyze and do this. So the more we can automate it and make the job easier for teachers, the better. Yeah, Beverly, it's tough being in a university context. You're right. I'm not sure that I ever thought about my growth or progress when I was at uni. I was mostly thinking fours, open doors. That was about it. That's achievement. Yeah, awesome, Alison. So Alison's just mentioned about looking at grades and goals and that sort of thing. Yeah, awesome, Claire. So that I wonder whether, Claire, that program did that automatically for you, or whether there was somebody in the school that generated those graphs for you. But that's a really good example of focusing on progress. Some of those programs do that. The other thing, pre and post tests, yeah, automatic, awesome. And pre and post tests is a really good example as well, actually, of progress, because students can actually see if the assessment is almost the same at the beginning of the unit and then at the end, they can actually see their growth. And that's one of the things that Carol Dweck talks about, can be a really useful tool in building growth mindset in students, is that actually shows them that their intelligence isn't fixed, that they can improve their knowledge with time and persistence and that sort of thing. Yeah, and Brodie, actually, that's a really good example, GPA. So there's a school in Brisbane that I was involved in my doctoral research actually, and they work with GPA. So I'm not sure exactly how you did that. I should probably read a bit faster. But the school I kind of interviewed at, they looked at a student's GPA over the year. So they had like a score out of 15 as their GPA score. And any student whose GPA raised or increased more than 0.5 from year to year, they were recognised at the awards night at the end of the year. So as well as academic achievement celebration, there was also awards for the students who'd made most progress, and the progress was measured in the improvement or the increase in GPA. That's a really good example. Awesome, thank you. There's always great ideas and things to learn from others. Sorry, I should be better with technology by now, shouldn't I? I think we've kind of talked about this. So the why. So this is all about what can we learn from it, and I guess the goal is always, what's the data telling us that we can then do? What do our students or young people need from us in order to help them progress or support their learning even further? So one of the things, one of the ways that this could happen might be in standardized testing. So we've talked a little bit about this. Brooke mentioned it, obviously, and the example I gave from the school that I was at with the PAT testing. But any standardized testing that you run in your school, you could kind of use this method. It relies on a scale score. So a scale score in standardized testing, no matter what band or staining they're in, if you're using PAT testing or bands in NAPLAN, their scale score should, in theory, increase. I went to, actually, Terry was there. Terry, I say this often, and Terry's on this webinar now. There was an ASA training that I went to, and Terry was one of the people that was running it. And I asked how much progress is adequate, like what's the goal from year to year on the ACR tests? And the response that I got was, any progress is good progress. And I've used that line so many times, Terry, since then. But that I think is a really, I think it's a really valid comment, because as it was pointed out to me at the time, students, we all make progress at different rates and at different times, and different conditions work for us in different ways. And, you know, I might make progress in one area of my life quite quickly, while something else I'm not making as much progress in. And it's exactly the same with our young people, where one subject, for example, they might be absolutely smashing it. There might be a lot of growth, and then something else they may have kind of bombed out and not done all that well. So any growth is good, where I'm running with that line. But one of the ways that you could celebrate this is to look at the students who have the greatest amount of growth in a particular standardized test. So the way that this is done, and I'm happy, I'll send out, like the last couple of webinars, I'll send out the PowerPoint in the email tomorrow with the recording, so you can have access to these. But it's a sum calculation. So the year 10 scale score in this case minus the year 9 scale score. So in that very first one, for student 1, they had a 13.1 point difference. Now, I think it's really important to actually have a look at the percentage difference, because if my initial scale score was 70 and I jumped to 80, that's a much bigger growth, percentage growth, than if I jump from 140 to 150. If I jump from 70 to 80, that's over 10% improvement. If I jump from 140 to 150, that's less than 10% improvement. So one of the ways, so you could just do it by the difference in scale score if you wanted to, but I would really kind of advocate for the percentage difference from the original score. And that's what I've done over on the right-hand side here. I conditionally format these. Again, as I said, this is kind of manual, but conditionally format them. But it's relatively easy to decide, say, for example, if you wanted to recognize maybe 5 students, the 5 students who made the most progress. So if I had sorted this properly beforehand, I would have seen there that student 16 is the student with the highest amount of growth because they had 12% improvement, followed by student 1. So that's certainly a way that you can do it. As I mentioned before, I've seen this done for standardized testing on assemblies. A school that I was recently working at, we did this for NAPLAN because the students actually hadn't taken NAPLAN all that seriously in the past. And so our focus was really on building almost like a positive view of NAPLAN. And we really encourage students to try their best and involve themselves in, like the team approach, if you like. And so we recognised the students who had the greatest, actually our tool showed effect size as well, but yeah, the greatest growth from, say, the year 7 test to the year 9 test. And it was just an opportunity, as we mentioned earlier, to recognise students who maybe wouldn't ordinarily get up on assembly. Another one that I've been working with a school just outside Mackay, and one of the things they've done recently is that as a system, they have to use DRA for reading assessment from prep to year 6. And they, for the system requirement, they have to assess in term 1 and they have to assess in term 3. And so one of the things that we did recently was we looked at how many levels in the DRA reading test the students had progressed. And same thing, they ran an assembly, and it literally came down to, like, the principal said to me, how do I even talk about this? How do I start talking about celebrating progress on assembly? And for me, that was a real kind of reminder that this doesn't come naturally to us. As I said right at the beginning, we're good at measuring achievement and talking about achievement, but the progress conversation can be really different. It's really important as well. So, and then I also had teachers on the same day saying, right, I want to be able to talk with my class about these things. How do I do that? Another one, sorry, I'm going back and forward. Whoa, there we go. Another way that you can do it is track learning area results. And so manually, if you were to do this, or if your learning management system or the visualization platform that you have access to in your school, it might do this already for you. One of the ways that you can do that is by using the 15-point scale, and you can have a look at the number of, I call them sub-levels that they move up. So if a student has moved from a D to a D+, for example, they've moved 1 sub-level. So their growth would be the same as if a student has moved from a C+ to a B-. Yep, totally different levels of work, totally different levels of achievement, but their movement along that continuum is arguably about the same. So one of the ways that you can do that, again, you can do like a VLOOKUP formula in Excel. I'm more than happy to send through how you can do that. But that's what I did for this spreadsheet, and it just automatically reads the grade, replaces it with a number in a hidden cell, and then it subtracts them. And then you're able to color code, set conditional formatting, and have a look at the, sort from the highest progress to the lowest progress. So the goal for that, or the reason why I would do that, for me as a teacher, I'd have a look at it and think, okay, well, there's a few students there that have improved. Sorry, those colors are the wrong way around. I'm not, the 0 should be yellow and the negative should be red. I'm not actually sure what I did there. But I would think, okay, well, almost all but 3 were at the same result as they previously achieved or higher. And I am super competitive. So most of my career when I was teaching, I was kind of looking at students' historical results and I was trying to work with them to beat it. Never did any dodgy marking or anything like that. But, it was just a bit of a game that I used to like to play to see whether I could drag them up and over the line to the next grade category. But what it would also make me do is to think, okay, so that student's gone from a B to a C+, what's happened there? What am I potentially able to do? If I don't have the answers, then actually engaging the students in that conversation could be a really powerful way to find out what their needs are, or where the gaps are, or what they need from you. And it can start really, I think learners, when we give them the chance to be involved in conversations about their learning, they can be really, they have a lot to say. They know what works for them and what doesn't. Another way, so this is an example of one dashboard that I've seen some schools use this one. This is from a track 1 dashboard. And as I said before, other visualization platforms do similar things in different ways. But the thing I really like about this is a senior English class, senior biology class. And it compares the students to their historical science assessment. And it shows you down that trend column with the little colored arrows, kind of says what their general trend over the last semester to semester has been. Now, again, I could look at that and go, yep, that's awesome, close my laptop, not do anything with it. But the value in this is actually the conversations that I can have with those young people about their progress. So the conversation that I would have with the student in the top row there would be very different to the student that is the third one down, who's kind of gone down, up, but is generally trending upwards. It would also be really different to the fourth one down, which is where they're kind of dropping slightly. So it's about the conversations. The goal, I guess, of having those conversations and talking to young people about this is we can start to learn from them what they need. We can start to work out for the students where their results are improving, like the student at the bottom, what are the things that are actually going well for them? What are the conditions that are working? And let's try and replicate that further in our subject, in other subject areas, and learn from them about the things that work for them as learners. Also helps them become a bit more self-aware about those things that are going well. Now, one of the other things you can do, and again, all of these are just really quite specific examples, but I'd like you to kind of think a bit bigger picture about how you could potentially use these, modify them, and apply them to your context. So, for example, one of the other things you could do is you can track cognitions, for example, or you can track parts of a test. So when I say parts of the test, I mean in early years maths, you might have some like knowledge and fluency questions, you might have some problem solving questions. In secondary maths, you might have the categories of like simple familiar questions, complex familiar questions, complex unfamiliar, and you might categorize the questions or the results into those categories. And for that, if you were to do that, you could analyze the information in very, very similar ways here, but it's more categorical data. And I use this example of cognitions. So for example, if the students down the left, six students, one assessment, they've been assessed in those cognitions or those parts of the assessment. Also tells you their total percentage at the end. Now, that's not really any progress tracking because that's just achievement tracking at this stage. But remember, when we talk about progress, we need to put it in the context of what they've done before, either as individuals or as groups or as the group. So one of the things you can do is then average down the bottom. You could average the result for each assessment, for example. So say, for example, over the year, students are doing 3 or 4 assessments. So you could look at this table at the top. That's the average assessment result in each cognition for all the students in the class. So this is now not comparing individual students to how they went the last time. This is comparing the whole class as a cohort compared to how they went the last time. And again, it's still a progress measure. It really can be a great tool to use in conversation with them. Because if you see down the bottom there, and those colors are a little bit tricky to see, but the line that's right at the top for comprehending, that's the 96% result. That's the highest and that's the most recent result. So I could use that graph at the bottom with my class if they were kind of older students in a senior subject, for example. And I could say to them, look, our comprehending result for that assessment is significantly higher. Like all of those things that we've been doing in class to practice comprehending and analysing for that matter have paid off. They've absolutely, we can see the rewards for doing all of that work, and we can see that their skill and understanding in the class is improving. Let's have a conversation about evaluating. Why didn't that go very well? Because you'll notice that that's actually lower than the first 2 assessments that they did. Now, you may know why that is lower. You might have an answer for that, but you also may not. So again, where possible, involve students in that conversation and just say to them, show them the data, be really transparent about it. This is de-identified. There's no unique individual results here. It's relatively safe to say this is how we've gone as a class. Let's have a conversation about it. And I think if you've never done that before, you might be surprised how open students can be. And they love talking about themselves as well. So any opportunity for them to talk about the things that work for them and don't work, I think, we should really capitalize on. And I think it was Claire that commented, the more we can actually involve students in those conversations and have conversations with them about their data that they own, I think they become a lot more data informed, and they're better able to set goals, track their own progress, and start to take a bit more ownership of their learning. So a couple more here. Wellbeing, again, depending on, there's quite a few programs around that track wellbeing in different ways, but this is just one example. There's one platform that I know of that generates these tables where students essentially get an average score out of 5 for each of the term or each time they take the assessment. And so what you can do over time is, rather than just build columns of term 1, term 2, term 3, is actually start to look at, well, what's the movement been? So from term 1 to term 2, for example, I've deliberately used really small numbers of students so that it's large enough for you to see on the screen, but hopefully you get my point. So I could see there, student 1 and student 4, term 1 to term 2, they've kind of tracked about the same. Students 2, 3, and 5, their wellbeing score, their self-reported wellbeing score has actually dropped a little bit from term 1 to term 2. And if we're talking about 2020, we could probably guess why that was, because in term 2, they did this assessment when they were at home, they weren't at school with their friends and that sort of thing. But then I've added term 3 on the right, and then I've again worked out the difference between, and I've chosen to do term 3 to term 2. You could go term 3 to term 1 if you wanted, totally up to you. But you'll notice there that, okay, well, there has been a bit of an improvement there. 2 students have increased quite significantly. Student 3 has gone from a 3.5 to a 4.1. So that's just a way of tracking and checking in on their wellbeing. What it would mean would be that the conversations I could have in term 2 with students 2, 3, and 5 would be really different to the conversations I could have with them in, very different to the conversations I could have with students 1 and 4. Same thing in term 3, student 3 and 4, things are actually looking up for them. It's going quite well. The conversations I have with them or the check-in will be very different to the conversations that I have with student 2, who's actually dropped both terms compared to where they were at the beginning of the year. So again, it's a conversation starter. It's an opportunity to talk to kids about what's going on, and hopefully, you can make things a little bit better for them. Nearly towards the end, I'm just going to try and rush through these last few, but another way, and Beverly alluded to this in her description before. Beverly, when you were talking, I was thinking that this is quite a similar example, perhaps, to what you were mentioning in the US, but the electronic version. So, and I've seen this work in a couple of different schools. This is learning progressions, but as Beverly mentioned, you could actually take so the elaborations in the Australian curriculum, and the elaborations could be across the top, for example, and you could just check them off when students achieve it, or when you know that they have achieved it. This is an example of learning progressions at level 1A, so that's like pre-foundation. So this is used for students who are working off level and below the foundation level curriculum. Now, that's one way of doing it, where you can just red, amber, green, but it doesn't really show you what they've achieved and when. So this is a slight modification. Rather than just colouring in the green when they achieve it or demonstrate it, you could actually add in the term that it happened, and you could colour code them slightly differently, like the text. What that would mean is just, and you can see there what's been achieved in term 3. You can kind of more clearly and more quickly see the progress that has been made. So you can see that second last column on the right, that there's actually been a lot of progress there. A lot of them have gotten there this term, and same with that other one kind of middle. There's quite a few that have achieved it. So that's just one way where if you were then having to report to parents, you would be able to say, okay, well, in term 2, or as a result of being here in term 2, these are the things that they're now able to do, or this is the progress and the things that have been added to their skill set, throughout this period of learning. 2 more quick examples to show you. This is an example. I was at a school outside Mackay, as I was mentioning before, and I did some work with them earlier in the year on the importance of measuring progress and discussing progress. And this was one of the things that the Year 6 teacher had done, which I absolutely loved. And he had a really powerful conversation with his students and the students were saying to me when I chatted with them about the wall, they said, we know we're not always going to get better every week, but we just want to be able to see that generally our results are improving. And that was all because of the language that he'd provided them with, and said to them, do you know what? Some weeks you'll go up and down, and that's okay, as long as the general trend is moving upwards. This was actually on the side wall of the classroom, and students, so they all had their own little graph, and each week they'd do their spelling test and they'd go over to the wall and they'd plot their point. I said, oh, did anybody put the wrong marks up there? And he said, no, they all kept one another honest. So it was pretty good. But a really powerful conversation about improving a particular skill. It was a school focus this year, spelling. But yeah, involving students in the conversations about progress. And the very last one, this is another one at the same school as a result of that PD at the beginning of the year, which I really love. Every student has their little ninja card and they wrote their name on their little ninja. And this teacher's extraordinary. She's actually a Year 3-4 composite teacher. And these are times tables. And so each student starts at the bottom there on the 1 times table. And as they demonstrate proficiency, they progress up the wall. And so the conversations that they have are around, what they have been able to achieve, strategies to learn the next level. They work together with students that are working at the same level or trying to get to that next belt. The added complication for her here in this example is that the times table expectations for Year 4 are slightly different to Year 3. So that's why over on the right-hand side, you can see the 4 times and the 6 times. That's actually the Year 4's move. So everybody starts at the bottom, they progress up to 2, up to 3, and then the 4's jump over to 4, and then they come back across the ladder. So that photo was taken a little while ago, but I've no doubt now that there's a lot of the students have moved up that, and it's just a great example of how she's been able to talk to her kids about progress as well. Rightio, I might pause there. If you have any questions, Beverly's still here. Beverly, is there anything that you would like to add?
I think it's very clear we've moved in a very positive direction since the times that we started looking at this ages ago in my day. And I think one of the most important parts that you keep emphasizing is to bring the students into this. And that's what I notice has been more valuable. It doesn't seem to matter the age. The students want to know a lot more about where they're at and what they can do to improve. I don't think that it was necessarily that students didn't want that when they were, how many decades ago. It was just that was not something we ever did. It was, the parents wanting to have this, whereas my student sitting 100%, 90%, 80% kind of thing, they didn't really want any other details. And I think we've moved in a really positive direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Beverly. Michelle, thank you. You're right. How can we involve students in their learning and that discussion about data as well? That's my next book, Data Informed Learners. It's sitting in a Word file. It hasn't made it to a publisher yet, but maybe one day. There's lots of ideas, and there's so much power in it. And I've seen that when I was in my role in the UK, having conversations with students about their performance and how they were going in senior PE. I mean, that's essentially what influenced my decision to start my doctorate when I came back to Australia, and has led to the work that I'm doing now. It can be completely transformational if you inherently believe in it and are able to explain that to students. Feel free to add any questions. We've only got a couple of minutes left, but thanks for coming this afternoon. If you want to hang around and ask any questions, you're more than welcome to. I'll be here for a few minutes yet, but I'll email out the link. So if there's anybody that you know that wasn't able to make it this afternoon, you can pass on the link to them. But yeah, hope you all have a really great end of term. And I hope, yeah, you have a very well-deserved Christmas break at the end of the year. So thanks for joining us. And I might pause there if there's no other questions, but I'll keep an eye on the chat box in case.